I had decided what Mara Vane was in the first week, the way you decide the weather from a single gray morning, and I was wrong the way only the confident are wrong. She sat 2 places down from me in the eastern tier of the tactics hall, and she was small. That is the first thing my people notice, because we are not small. The Valens stand a head and a half above most of the Concord's member species, and we carry our height like an argument. Mara came up to my shoulder. She had brown hair she tied back without ceremony, hands that looked made for turning pages and nothing heavier, and a way of sitting so still that I sometimes forgot she was there at all. When the instructors called the roll, she answered in one word. When they did not call on her, she said nothing. I took her silence for the silence of someone with nothing to say. Understand what the Concord Institute at Halden Reach is, so you understand how badly I misread the room. Every species that signs the charter sends its promising young there, the ones marked early for command, and for 4 years we are ground together in the same halls until we learn each other's doctrines well enough to fight beside them without confusion. It is the finest military school in the settled galaxy. To be sent there is to be told, before you have earned it, that your people expect great things. We all arrived knowing that about ourselves, and it made us insufferable in the particular way of the young and chosen. Humanity had only been a full member of the charter for a little over a generation. Their world sat out past the Khalsa frontier, in the rough part of the map, and most of what we knew of them we knew as rumor. They had come into the wider galaxy during the Kestrel Wars, on the wrong side of a border dispute that turned into something larger, and they had come out of those wars still holding their worlds, which was more than the odds had allowed for. But that had been before my time and before Mara's, and to a cadet of the Concord the Kestrel Wars were a chapter in a text, a set of exam questions about supply lines and treaty terms. History is what happens to other people. I believed that then. I don't now. She was the only human in our cohort. There were 40 of us across 9 species, and the Institute mixed us on purpose, so that no one sat only with their own kind, and Mara sat with the Valen and the Thrennic and the 2 Osk brothers because that was where the seating chart had put her. She was polite. She learned our names the first day and used them correctly, which is more than most managed, and she asked nothing of anyone. If you had asked me in that first month to describe her, I would have said, quiet, human, harmless. I would have said it the way you describe furniture, and I would have been describing my own blindness and calling it her. The instructors were harder on the human than on the rest of us. I noticed it and thought little of it. Master Vorcel, who taught fleet tactics and had fought in 3 campaigns before he ever taught a class, seemed to take a particular sourness to her. He would call on her for the hardest problems, the ones designed to expose a cadet, and Mara would give her answer in that flat, spare voice, and he would find fault with it whether it deserved fault or not. Once he made her stand and defend a deployment she had sketched on the board, and he took it apart line by line in front of all of us, and she stood through it without color rising in her face, without excuse, and when he was done she said only, "Yes, sir," and sat back down. I thought he was cruel. I thought she took it because she was weak. I had the whole thing upside down, and I would not learn it right for a long time. There was a game we played, the cohort, in the off hours, in the wide low room they called the stratagem, where a great table projected battles from the archives and let us take command of the pieces. It was how we tested ourselves against each other when no instructor was scoring us. We were vain about it. The Thrennic cadet, Ask, was the best of us, quick and merciless, and the rest of us ranked ourselves below her in an order we all pretended not to keep. Mara played when she was asked and lost more than she won, and we filed her at the bottom of that private order without a word passing between us, because that is what cohorts do. We measured her by the game and found her small, and the game was a game. I remember one evening in particular. We were running the siege of Corvath's Deep, a famous defensive action, and I had the defenders, and I lost them badly, and I was in a foul mood about it. Ask was teasing me, the way she did, and I said something to deflect it. I said that anyone could have held that position, that the pieces were stacked, that it wasn't a fair test. And Mara, who almost never spoke unless spoken to, looked up from where she was resetting a line of markers, and she said, quietly, "You can hold a position like that. It just costs more than the game charges you for." I laughed. I actually laughed. I asked her what she would know about it, and she looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not read then and can read very well now, and she said nothing else. She went back to the markers. Ask changed the subject, and I filed the moment away as one more piece of evidence that the human said strange, self-important things sometimes, and I forgot it inside a day. That was the shape of the first half of our year. I want you to feel how ordinary she was, because if you don't feel it, you can't feel the rest. She was ordinary the way a folded flag is ordinary, if you have never been told what the fold means. She was ordinary the way a closed door is ordinary. I walked past her 100 times and never once tried the handle. There were small things, if I had been the kind of person who noticed small things. She never sat with her back to a door. She took the seat that faced the entrance, and she took it without seeming to think about it. And if someone had taken it first, she would stand near the wall instead of the open floor. She woke before the waking bell always, and I knew this because our windows faced the same court and hers was lit when mine was dark. When a maintenance drone dropped a rack of equipment in the corridor one morning, a hard, flat crack of sound, 40 cadets flinched or turned, and Mara did not flinch and did not turn. She had already moved before the sound finished, 3 steps to the wall with her weight low, and then she straightened and looked faintly embarrassed and went on to class, and I thought only that humans were twitchy, and I was wrong about that the way I was wrong about all of it. She had a scar. I saw it once on the inside of her forearm when she pushed her sleeve back to reach into the cold locker in the commons, a long pale seam that ran from wrist nearly to elbow. Old and well-heeled and precise in the way that surgical things are precise. I asked her about it, without much interest, the idle question you ask to fill a silence. She pulled the sleeve down and said she'd caught it on something once, and I let it go, because I did not yet know that there are people who have learned to say small, true-sounding things so that you will stop asking, and that this skill is not something a person acquires from catching an arm on something once. The turning of the year came in the season the Institute called the cold term, when the tactics halls moved from theory to case study, and Master Vorcel began to teach us from the archives of real engagements. This was the part of the curriculum we had all been waiting for. We were tired of invented problems. We wanted the true ones, the recorded battles, the actual footage recovered from actual ships and actual ground, because we were young, and we believed that watching war was the same as knowing it. The Institute held one of the great war archives of the Charter, sensor logs and helmet recordings and orbital captures, going back through every conflict the member species had committed to record. Master Vorcel would darken the hall and put an engagement on the great screen and walk us through it, freezing the moment before a commander's decision, asking us what we would do, then letting the real decision play out and its real consequences follow. It was the finest teaching I ever received. It was also, though I did not know it, the machine that was going to take my comfortable understanding of the universe apart. We studied the Khalsa frontier campaigns because they were recent enough that the doctrine still mattered and old enough that the records had been cleared for teaching. The frontier had been ugly. The Charter's border with the Sethite ascendancy had come apart in a series of raids and reprisals that the histories called the Khalsa incursions, and the fighting there had been the kind that does not make it cleanly into a textbook, because textbooks like Decisive Battles in the Frontier gave mostly the other kind, the grinding kind, the holding kind, the kind where the question is not who wins, but who is still standing when the enemy decides the ground was not worth the cost. Master Vorcel put the Sethite doctrine up first, and it was elegant, and I admired it, because my people admire elegance in war the way some peoples admire it in music. The Sethites fought by calculation. They would assess a position, assign it a value, commit exactly the force that value justified, and if the position cost more than it was worth, they would break off and take a better one. It was rational. It was, Master Vorcel told us, the most efficient war-making doctrine the Charter had ever faced, and it had very nearly rolled up the entire Khalsa frontier in a single season, because efficiency, on paper, beats almost everything. Almost everything, he said, and I remember he was not looking at the screen when he said it. He was looking at the eastern tier of the hall. I did not follow his eye. I wish I had, because I would have seen where it landed, and I might have been readier for what came. He taught us the frontier for 3 weeks, and it was a study in efficiency defeating gallantry, position after position falling to the Sethite calculus, and I began to form a smug little thesis in my mind that the Charter's frontier defenders had simply been less intelligent than their enemy, that they had thrown themselves at hopeless ground out of sentiment, and that sentiment was a luxury of the poorly trained. I was very pleased with this thesis. I may even have said it aloud in the stratagem one night. If I did, I hope Mara was not there to hear it, but I suspect she was, because she was usually there, resetting the markers, saying nothing. Then came the day Master Vorcel put up Anvil Station. I did not know the name. None of us did except one of us, and I did not know which one yet. Master Vorcel dimmed the hall and said we were going to look at an engagement that was not in our reading, an engagement that the archive had only recently cleared for teaching, and that he wanted us to watch it cold, without knowing the outcome, and form our judgments as it played. This was unusual. He usually framed a battle before he showed it. This time he simply darkened the room and let it run. Anvil Station was a human forward position on a moon called Derek's Halt, a gray airless rock at the far edge of the Khalsa line, a refueling and early warning post with a garrison that the records listed as 140. It had no strategic value that the Sethite calculus recognized. It was a waypoint. By the doctrine we had studied for 3 weeks, it should have been abandoned the moment a serious force approached it, because it was worth less than the cost of holding it, and the humans knew this, and the Sethites knew the humans knew it, and so a Sethite column came to take the station expecting the garrison to fall back, and the plan on both sides was that Anvil Station would change hands without much of a fight. The footage was helmetry-covered and orbital and station internal, stitched together by the archive into something you could follow. It began quietly. It began with a garrison doing the ordinary work of a garrison, and I remember being bored for the first minute, and I remember the boredom curdling. The Sethite column landed and demanded surrender, and the garrison did not surrender, and I thought, sentiment, foolishness, they'll be cut apart. And they were cut apart. The station's outer works fell in the first hours, and the recording showed it, the clean, efficient reduction of a position by an enemy who had done the arithmetic and committed exactly enough. I watched the human numbers fall. 140, and then fewer, and then fewer, the archive tracking it in a cold sidebar of the display, and I felt the thing I had been taught to feel, which was the sad satisfaction of watching a thesis proven. And then the garrison did not break. This is the thing I cannot make you feel in words the way the footage made me feel it, sitting in that dark hall. By every measure we had been taught, the human position was lost by the end of the first day. The doctrine on both sides said the survivors would surrender or flee, because there was no longer anything to hold and no reason to hold it and no help coming, and holding meant dying for a refueling post on a gray rock that no one would remember. That is the point at which a rational force stops. That is the point at which the Sethite calculus said the battle was over. The garrison did not stop. They pulled back into the station's core and they held it, and the recording ran on, and the number in the sidebar kept falling, and they kept holding, past the first day, into the second, into the third. The Sethite column, which had come to spend a small rational sum, found itself spending more, and there is a moment in the footage Master Vorcel froze it and let it sit, where the Sethite commander's own transmission is captured, and you can hear, even through the translation the archive supplied, that the commander does not understand what is happening. He has done the arithmetic. The humans are outside the arithmetic. He does not have a column of the kind of force that the humans have turned this into. Because his doctrine never told him he would need one. Because his doctrine could not conceive of an enemy that would refuse to acknowledge that it had lost. They held Anvil Station for 11 days. I want to write that again so that it sits on the page, the way it sat on the screen. 140 defenders, a position worth nothing, no relief force possible, and they held it for 11 days against an enemy that had come expecting to take it in an afternoon. And by the time the Charter's Khalsa fleet was able to break through and reach that gray rock, a fleet that reached it only because the Sethite column had been pinned there, bleeding, for 11 days instead of rolling on down the line. By the time relief arrived, the arithmetic of the entire frontier had changed. The Sethite offensive that had been about to break the Khalsa line had stalled in front of a waypoint, and the stall had given the Charter the days it needed to bring up the force that turned the campaign. Anvil Station, which was worth nothing, had been the hinge the whole frontier turned on, and no one who planned it had planned it. It had simply happened because a garrison would not acknowledge that it had lost. Master Vorcel let the relief arrive on the screen. He let us see the Charter's ships come down over the gray moon, and then he let the recording show us what the relief found, and the hall, which had been silent, became a different kind of silent. They found 7 of 140. The recording moved through the ruined core of the station, the recovered helmet view of a Charter medic picking through it, and it found them where they had made their last stand, in a compartment around the station's reactor trunk, which they had held because holding it kept the station's guns alive, and there were 7 of them still able to stand, and the medic's recording moved across their faces one by one. The 6th face was Mara Vane. I did not understand it at first. I looked at the screen and I saw a human face, filthy, gaunt, older than the face I sat 2 places from, but the same face, and my mind refused it. It offered me a dozen explanations. A relative, a coincidence of feature, a trick of the poor recording. My mind did everything it could to keep the 2 facts apart, the small quiet human in the seat down the tier, and the figure on the screen who had held a reactor trunk on a gray moon for 11 days. Because those 2 facts, put together, broke something I had been carrying around inside me my whole life, which was the belief that I understood the difference between important people and unimportant ones, between the ones history happens to and the ones it happens around. The medic's recording lingered on her because she was the one still on her feet directing the others, the one the medic went to first for the tally of who remained, and in the recording she gave the tally in a flat, spare voice, the same voice, unmistakably the same voice, that had told me in the stratagem that you can hold a position like that. It just costs more than the game charges you for. I turned. The whole hall turned. 40 cadets across 9 species turned in the dark toward the eastern tier, toward the seat 2 places down from mine, and Master Vorcel did not stop us, because he had darkened the hall and run the footage cold precisely so that we would turn, precisely so that we would do our arithmetic in front of her and get it wrong and then get it right. Mara sat with her back straight and her hands folded on the desk in front of her, and she looked at the screen and not at any of us. The light from the recording moved across her face, the ruined station, the 7 survivors, her own younger face gaunt among them, and she watched it without expression, the way you watch whether you have already lived through. She had known this was coming. I understood that later. Master Vorcel had told her the case was cleared for teaching, had asked her permission or at least given her warning, and she had said yes, or she had said nothing, which with Mara amounted to the same thing, and she had come to class and sat in her seat and let 40 strangers watch the worst days of her life and then watched them turn to look at her. The recording ended. Master Vorcel raised the lights, and into a silence I have never heard the equal of, he said, Cadet Vane was 17 of your standard years at Anvil Station. She had been in service 4 months. He let that sit. The doctrine you have spent 3 weeks admiring is the finest efficient war-making doctrine in the settled galaxy, and it broke on a waypoint that a rational force would have abandoned, because it met a people who do not compute the value of a position the way the rest of us do. I have been trying for 3 weeks to teach you what humans are. I could not do it with my own words. I let the archive do it. Now you have seen. He looked at Mara, and something in his sourness, which I had taken for contempt, revealed itself as the thing it had always been, which was a hard old soldier's grief, and respect too raw to show as kindness. You may go, cadet, if you wish. Mara did not go. She said, I'll stay, sir. And she stayed, and Master Vorcel taught the rest of the hour on the tactics of the defense, and she answered when he called on her in her flat, spare voice, and she did not once, then or ever, offer a single word about what it had been to be there. Brevity and silence. I did not have those words for it then. I have them now. I could not look at her for the rest of that class. I was ashamed, and the shame was the good kind, the kind that rearranges you. I thought of the stratagem, of the private order in which we had filed her at the bottom, of my laughing at her, of my asking what she would know about holding a hopeless position, and I wanted to sink through the floor of the hall. But the shame was not the largest thing I felt. The largest thing was a kind of vertigo, the sensation of the ground I stood on turning out to be a floor over a depth I had never suspected. I had thought I knew what a person was. I had sorted the cohort into the impressive and the ordinary, and I had put her among the ordinary, and I had been standing next to a depth for half a year and calling it flat ground. When the class ended, I did not go to her. I did not have the courage, and I did not have the right, and I sensed, even in my confusion, that going to her with my astonishment would be a way of making her carry my feelings on top of her own. So I said nothing that day, and the day after, and I watched instead. I watched how the cohort changed around her, and it is the changing that taught me the last part, the part I have carried longest. Because here is what I expected. I expected that she would become, overnight, a legend among us. I expected the cohort to gather around her to press her for the story, to elevate her to the top of our private order, to treat her the way the young treat the suddenly revealed hero. Some of that happened in the first days, the crude version of it. Ask, who had been the best of us at the game, went to Mara and said something. I don't know what, and Mara answered briefly, and Ask came away quiet. A few of the cruder cadets wanted the story, the blood of it, the 11 days, and they circled her at meals asking questions in the eager way of people who have never seen the thing they are asking about. And Mara turned every one of those questions aside with a flatness that was not rudeness but was final, a door closing gently and completely, until they stopped asking. What I had not expected, and what taught me the most, was this. It changed nothing in her. She woke before the bell. She sat with her back to the wall. She answered the roll in one word. She lost at the game and reset the markers. She was exactly as ordinary on the day after the whole hall turned to look at her as she had been on the day I first decided she was furniture, and I came slowly to understand that the ordinariness was not a disguise she had been wearing over the truth. The ordinariness was the truth. The girl who reset the markers in the stratagem and the figure who held the reactor trunk for 11 days were not two people, a false one over a real one. They were one person, and the holding and the quiet were the same thing, made of the same material, and I had thought them opposite only because I had never met the material before. I finally spoke to her about 3 weeks after Anvil Station played in the hall. It was late in the stratagem. The others had gone. She was resetting the markers from a game she had lost, sliding the little pieces back into their starting lines with those hands I had once thought were made for turning pages and nothing heavier, and I sat down across from her. And for a while I did not know how to begin, and she let me not know, working the markers, not helping me. Finally I said the only true thing I had. I said, I filed you at the bottom. In the game, all of us did. I want you to know that I know how wrong I was. She looked up, and she gave me, for the first time, something that was almost a smile, though it did not reach the stillness at the center of her, which I understood by then was permanent and had been earned. She said, the game's a good game, Isev. I'm not good at it. She slid another marker home. It charges you the right price. Move a piece into a bad position, you lose the piece, and the game tells you right away, so you learn. Real ground doesn't tell you right away. On real ground, you find out the price a long time after you've already paid it. She was quiet a moment. I'm slow at the game because I keep trying to hold things the game says to give up. That's a bad habit at this table. It was a worse habit out there. She looked at the reset board, the pieces all back in their innocent starting lines. But it's the only habit I've got, so I brought it here to see if I could learn a better one. I asked her because I could not help it, because I was young and the question was too big to hold. I asked her whether it had been worth it. Anvil Station. The 11 days. The 133. I asked her the boys' question, the stratagem question, the question of a person who thinks a battle is a sum you can total up and check. She did not answer for a while. She finished the markers. Then she said, "That's not a question you get to ask afterward. You ask it before when you're deciding, and you never have enough to answer it, so you decide without answering it." She stood and picked up her jacket, and at the door she stopped and said the thing I have carried longest in the flat, spare voice, without weight, as if it were the most obvious thing in the settled galaxy. She said, "We didn't hold it because it was worth it. We held it because they were behind us, and we were what was in front of them." And she went out, and the stratagem was very quiet, and I sat there a long time with the reset board and its innocent pieces, and I understood at last that I had spent my whole life at this table, at a board that charged me the right price and told me right away, and that I had learned to call that knowledge of war, and that I had been sitting for half a year 2 places down from someone who had held a position on real ground where the price is never right and never told to you in time, and had come back from it, and had reset the markers, and had said nothing, and would have gone on saying nothing forever if an old, sour, grieving instructor had not darkened a hall and made 40 children turn in the dark and see. We graduated, the cohort, in our 4th year and scattered to our fleets and our services across the charter, and I have not seen Mara Vane in a long time now. I have followed her from a distance, the way you follow someone you were young beside. She rose. Of course she rose. She commands now, out on the frontier that made her, and the reports that reach me say that the ground she is given to hold tends to stay held, and that the young officers under her speak of her the way I once could not, quietly, without embellishment, as if her name did not need any. I command too in my own service, and I am, they tell me, a good commander, and I will tell you the one thing I do differently than I was trained to do, the one thing that is hers and not mine. When I am given a position to assess, I do the arithmetic I was taught, the value and the cost, the elegant veil in calculus, and then before I decide I make myself remember Anvil Station. I make myself remember that there is a kind of enemy, and a kind of soldier, and a kind of people, that does not compute the value of a position the way the doctrine computes it, and that the whole frontier can turn on a waypoint worth nothing because 140 of them decided that the people behind them mattered more than the arithmetic in front of them. I make myself remember that I once sat 2 places down from that, for half a year, and called it ordinary and was wrong. They were behind us, and we were what was in front of them. I have heard many definitions of courage in the tactics halls and the after-action reviews and the long, dull literature of war. That is the only one I have ever believed, and I learned it from a small, quiet human who lost at games, who woke before the bell, who sat with her back to the wall, and who never once, in all the time I knew her, told me she was anything but ordinary. She was right about that too, in the way that matters most and that I understood last of all. She was ordinary. She was an ordinary daughter of an ordinary, terrible, magnificent people, and the whole revelation, the thing the battle video exposed, the truth the archive could not keep, was not that Mara Vane was extraordinary. It was that, out on the gray rocks at the edge of the map, the ordinary ones are like that. And we had never known.